You know that feeling when you sit down with your planner, write out everything you need to do tomorrow, organize it by hour, and then close the notebook feeling somehow more exhausted than when you started. You didn't do anything yet, you just planned. But your body feels like it already ran the day. Most people blame themselves for this. They think they're overthinking, or that they lack discipline, or that planning just isn't for them. But the tiredness you feel after planning isn't a character flaw. It's a documented psychological response that happens in your brain whether you want it to or not. When you plan your day, you're not just writing tasks on paper. You're mentally simulating every single one of those tasks before they happen. Your brain doesn't distinguish very well between imagining an action and preparing to do it. So when you list out 10 things you need to do tomorrow, your brain starts preloading the emotional and cognitive weight of all 10 things at once. Research into mental simulation shows that vividly imagining a future task activates many of the same brain regions that light up when you actually perform that task. Your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for planning and decision-making, fires up as if the work has already begun. You're not just thinking about sending that email. You're mentally drafting it, anticipating the response, adjusting your tone, wondering if you should add Sarah to the thread. And that process costs energy, real measurable energy, the same kind of glucose your brain burns when you actually sit down and write the email for real. Here's where it gets worse. When you plan, you don't just simulate the tasks themselves, you simulate the transitions between them. You imagine wrapping up the morning meeting, then switching gears to focus on the report, then remembering to call the client before lunch. Each of those transitions requires your brain to mentally shift contexts. And context switching is one of the most energy-draining things your brain does. So by the time you finish planning your day, your brain has already lived through a compressed, high-speed version of it. You've burned cognitive fuel without producing any actual output. You feel tired because, neurologically speaking, you kind of already worked. This is why people who plan meticulously often feel more drained than people who just wing it. It's not because planning is bad. It's because the act of planning forces your brain into a state of readiness that it can't sustain. You've essentially put your brain on high alert for tasks that are still hours or days away. Think about what happens when you write down a difficult conversation you need to have. Maybe it's asking your boss for time off or telling a roommate about a problem. The moment you write it in your planner, your brain starts rehearsing that conversation. It runs through possible responses, considers different approaches, anticipates how the other person might react. You haven't said a word out loud, but internally, you've already had that conversation multiple times. The problem gets even more complicated when your plan is detailed. If you write down that you'll answer emails at 9, work on the presentation at 10, and review the budget at 11, your brain begins tracking all of that in working memory. Working memory is the mental space you use to hold and manipulate information in the moment. It's limited, very limited. When you load it up with a detailed schedule before the day even starts, you're occupying mental resources that you'll need later for the actual work. You're essentially pre-spending your cognitive budget on a preview of the day, leaving less for the real thing. And if something disrupts your plan, which it almost always does, your brain has to re-simulate everything. That email took longer than expected, so now the presentation gets pushed back, which means the budget review might not happen, and suddenly your brain is running multiple versions of your day in parallel, trying to reconcile what you planned with what's actually happening. That recalculation is exhausting. It's like trying to navigate using a map while someone keeps moving the streets. Your brain expends additional energy not just on the original plan, but on constantly updating and revising that plan in real time. Now think about how often you do this. You plan tomorrow tonight. You plan the week on Sunday. You plan the month at the beginning of the month. Every time you plan, you're triggering this same mental simulation process. You're living through future days before they arrive, burning energy on imagined versions of work that may not even unfold the way you picture. Some people feel this more than others. If you're someone who visualizes vividly, or if you tend to think through problems in detail, planning will drain you faster. Your brain doesn't skim over the tasks. It fully renders them. It considers obstacles, anticipates problems, rehearses solutions. All of that happens automatically beneath your conscious awareness, while you're just sitting there with a pen in your hand. There's also an emotional component that most people don't recognize. When you plan your day, you're not just listing neutral activities, you're attaching emotional weight to each one. That presentation carries anxiety. That phone call carries dread. That meeting carries frustration from last time. Your brain processes all of those emotions during the planning phase, not just during the execution phase. So you're not only simulating the tasks themselves, you're pre-experiencing the emotional texture of your entire day. That's a lot to process before you've even gotten out of bed or finished your coffee. And here's the uncomfortable part. The tiredness you feel after planning might actually be your brain trying to protect you from overcommitment. When you lay out too much on paper, your brain runs the numbers and realizes it doesn't have enough resources to execute all of it. The fatigue is a signal, not a failure. A signal that you've asked too much of a system that operates on limited fuel. But most people interpret that signal as weakness. They think they should be able to plan a full day without feeling drained, so they push through the fatigue and plan anyway. Then they wonder why they can't follow through. The truth is, the plan exhausted them before they even started. The resistance they feel isn't laziness. It's their brain recognizing that the cognitive tank is already half empty. This doesn't mean planning is pointless. It means the act of planning has a cost that most people don't account for. You can't treat it like a neutral activity. It's cognitive labor. It uses the same mental resources you'll need to actually do the work. Some people try to fix this by planning less. They write down fewer tasks, keep the list vague, avoid time blocking, and that helps to a degree. A shorter plan means less mental simulation, which means less pre-fatigue, but it also means less structure, and for some people that creates a different kind of stress. The uncertainty of not knowing what comes next can be just as draining as overplanning. Others try to plan further in advance, thinking that if they plan the whole week on Monday, they won't have to think about it again. But that just compresses all the mental simulation into one exhausting session. You're still pre-living the week. You're just doing it all at once instead of spreading it out. And when you sit down to do the actual tasks days later, your brain has often forgotten the simulation. So it has to run through everything again anyway. There's also the issue of perfectionism in planning. Some people don't just plan what they'll do. They plan the optimal way to do it. They consider the most efficient order, the best time of day for each task, the ideal environment. All of that optimization requires additional cognitive processing. You're not just simulating the tasks. You're simulating multiple versions of the tasks and comparing them against each other. That's why planning can sometimes take longer than just doing the thing, because you're not planning. You're problem-solving, predicting, and optimizing all at once. And your brain treats all of that mental work as if it's real work because to your brain it is. There's no clean solution here. This is just how brains work. Planning triggers simulation. Simulation burns energy. Energy is finite. You can be aware of it, but you can't bypass it. What you can do is stop blaming yourself for feeling tired after planning. It's not a lack of discipline. It's not overthinking. It's a predictable cognitive response to a task that requires your brain to do something it wasn't really designed to do, which is hold a detailed multi-step future in working memory while also living in the present.